Welcome back to the Last Days Book Club, where we are reading the book entitled Dwelling in the Secret Place by Sonica Veith. This is an ebook available online for free at clashofminds.com, where you can download it and read along with us. Sonica Veith is the spouse of well-known evangelist, lecturer, university professor, and zoologist Dr. Walter Veith. And this true story is a chronicle of their life together, their ministry, their numerous trials, tribulations, and hardships, as well as their successes, victories, and triumph. In our last reading, we covered chapter 5, entitled Into the Light. This was another exciting chapter, with many events taking place, starting with Walter's decision to make more space in their home. Without warning, one day, he took a sledgehammer to the walls and started making more space. This resulted in a complete remodeling of their home into a beautiful, well-landscaped sanctuary, complete with a swimming pool. However, during some of the earth-moving episodes, Sonica ran to save her plants from being bulldozed and was bitten by a venomous snake. She almost died and remained in a semi-paralytic coma for quite a few days until she eventually recovered and returned home from the hospital. Having returned to a somewhat normal life, Sonica and Walter felt guilty that after the Catholic Church had exorcised the demons from their home, that they had done nothing to show their appreciation. So they made a substantial donation, which was received with indifference and left Walter still feeling guilty. So he started taking Martin, his eldest son, to church on Sundays, and soon the whole family was going, and then onto their squash game and beer drinking afterward. One day, in class, Walter belittled and humiliated a student who dared to question his teachings on evolution while proclaiming her faith in God. Later in his office, he felt guilty at how he had treated her, and, despite himself, he went to the church to confess. There was no priest there, and while he sat in the pew and saw the little red light on the altar indicating that the host, which was the actual body of Christ, was present, he remarked how foolish was it that God could be locked up in an empty church in a little box. Sometime later, while looking for something that he had misplaced, Walter found a pamphlet that a German cabinet maker had given him some 2 years ago when they were renovating their kitchen. The tract showed that the Catholic Church had changed the 10 Commandments, and this discovery began a series of events that changed their life completely. They got in touch with Werner, the cabinet maker, and they began studying the Bible earnestly. They devoured the books of Daniel and Revelation and learned the history of the Catholic Church and its claims to be God on earth, and that the change of the commandments was their mark of authority in religious matters, and that the Church was the Antichrist. As their eyes opened to the truth, they learned the great difference between what the churches teach about death and what the Bible teaches. As they delved into that issue, they began to understand the role of Satan and the occult experiences they had encountered in their lives. Their lives were beginning to change dramatically. But there was one thing Walter couldn't grasp, and it was the issue of the Sabbath and creation. Being a renowned evolutionary scientist, he could not accept that creation took place in 6 literal days. Therefore, the Sabbath as a day could not have any special significance. He challenged Werner to prove to him that the 6 days were literal. But Werner turned the challenge back to him, saying, I already believe it and have no need to prove it. You don't believe it, so go and prove it yourself. Asking God to show him, Walter started to search. And through a couple of books that he found in the zoological library, and a lecturer who visited the university, he found evidence which convinced him. And so began the greatest change in his life. Shortly afterward, he was to address a large gathering of internationally and locally renowned evolutionary scientists at his university. And there, he revealed the results of his research, showing that all of evolution was based on assumptions and theories presented as facts, and was all nothing more than a vast deception. All pandemonium broke loose, and the scientists raged at him. But one postgraduate student stood up and pointed out how they had destroyed her faith and that Walter was correct. Walter ended up resigning his position, understanding that he had just destroyed his academic career, or so he thought, but determined to embark upon a journey to reveal and expose the powers of darkness and the deception that has captivated the world in its satanic snare. Dear listeners, please don't forget, you can download this book for free at clashofminds.com and read along with us as we pick up the story today with chapter 6, entitled Test in the Wilderness. Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 31. And in the wilderness, where thou hast seen how that the Lord thy God bare thee, as a man doth bear his son, in all the way that ye went, until ye came into this place. Would you like to come to church with us and then have lunch at our house afterwards? Werner asked. And when Walter hesitated, he quickly added, we can do a Bible study in the afternoon. Going to church was something we did not actually have in mind for Saturdays. It was our regular squash game and braai day with our friends. Walter was an expert barbecuer and was famous for his grilled marinated pork ribs. Although we had accepted the Sabbath as the true day of worship, we had hoped that we could keep it more or less to ourselves. We didn't need confrontation with family and friends at that stage. But we felt a strange sense of urgency and agreed to meet them at their house in Somerset West on Saturday morning. Being in a rather defiant mood that Sabbath morning, Walter rummaged impatiently through his untidy cupboard. Where's my holy shirt? Haven't you washed it yet? He used to call his favorite t-shirt his holy shirt because, firstly, it was full of holes from a near-death experience on a windmill, and secondly, because I wasn't allowed to touch it or threaten to get rid of it. You're not going to wear your holy shirt, I protested. Of course I can. I can wear anything I wanted to the Catholic Church. Yes, but this is different. Wear something nice. He grumbled to himself and fished out a creased t-shirt that had seen better days and his shabby jeans. I said nothing further, only too grateful that he had backed down so easily. When we arrived at the church, Walter gave me a grin that only I understood as we watched the immaculate church members in their suits and ties and smart dresses gathered outside the church. Even I felt embarrassed. I didn't even possess a dress, let alone a church dress. But the people greeted us with so much warmth and enthusiasm that we soon felt at home. Our new friends took our children to the children's classes, and we were able to drink in all the knowledge and thoughts that were expressed and exchanged. After church, a group of friends of Werner and his wife Inga met at their house for lunch. The ladies were scurrying backwards and forwards with large, strange-looking dishes. We soon found out that they were vegetarian because of health benefits, and they proceeded to show us in the Bible that God gave the Jews some health laws to protect them from disease. We discovered for the first time that certain foods were declared unclean or not fit for human consumption, such as pork and shellfish as described in Leviticus 11. I looked at Walter for a brief moment, wondering what our friends would say if we told them that he's not cooking his famous pork ribs anymore because they're unclean. I can understand if God says it's unclean, but nowhere in the Bible does he say you must be a vegetarian. I'm sorry to say, but this green stuff isn't food. Every scientist can tell you that the human being is a carnivore. It needs meat. It needs protein. Something like a big, juicy steak this size, Walter gestured with his hands, as he tried to convince these people that they were on the wrong track. Well, you know, came the timid voice from a little lady called Jane. Sitting to the right of Walter, nuts are a very good source of protein. They're very, very good for you, especially almonds. She shifted slightly away from him, almost as if she was expecting the agitated German to pounce on her. Sure, they're very good for you, especially if you like cyanide. That's what's in them, you know? An uneasy silence came over the group. Some gave an embarrassed chuckle and tried to change the topic. My eyes followed the circle of people around the large table, and a fear gripped my heart as I noticed their way of dressing, the way they speak, their pale faces and watery, innocent eyes, and I suddenly felt I had to get out. Everything seemed so different to the world and the people we knew. Take me home. I want to go home, I whispered to Walter. We can't go home now. It'll be rude. Okay, we'll just say we want to go for a drive. That evidently wasn't the best excuse, because they insisted that we leave our children with them, who were happily climbing trees with the other children in the backyard until we return. This, of course, meant we had to return. We drove to Stellenbosch in silence, each struggling with his own thoughts, wondering and fretting about how we got ourselves into such a situation. At home, I was totally overwhelmed and ran to our bedroom and sobbed for an hour. Walter tried to comfort me, but felt equally confused and helpless. My heart was torn between my family and our familiar environment and this strange new world where I knew the only eternal truth was. I cried inconsolably for my father, who I realized was living a life of dreadful deception and danger. And I longed for my parents to understand that without God, we're all lost forever. For God alone has life and immortality to give to those who accept his free gift. And even though my parents were wonderful people and gave us a respectable upbringing, all have sinned and come short of the glory of God and needed to be covered by his righteousness. Romans 3, verse 23. Wherefore, as by one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin, and so death passed upon all men, for that all have sinned. Romans 5:12. For the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. Romans 6:23. I closed my Bible and looked helplessly at Walter. It felt like the weight of the whole world was resting on my feeble shoulders. We better go back. Wash your face. Everything will be okay now, Walter said. We drove all the way back and joined the crowd without anyone noticing our distress. During the following weeks, we continued to study our Bible and discovered some amazing truths that are so clear and logical, but are not practiced by most of the Christian denominations. We learned, for instance, that the wine that was condoned in the scriptures was in fact new wine or unfermented wine, that is, grape juice. This is the new wine found in the cluster, of which the scripture says, "Destroy it not, for a blessing is in it." Isaiah 65 and verse 8. But the wine that is condemned is alcoholic, fermented wine, as found in a number of texts. Woe unto him that giveth his neighbor drink, that puttest thy bottle to him, and makest him drunken also, that thou mayest look on their nakedness. Habakkuk 2 and verse 15. Wine is a mocker, strong drink is raging, and whosoever is deceived thereby is not wise. Proverbs 20 and verse 1. We understood for the first time that the wine that Jesus provided at the wedding in Cana was not fermented wine, but pure, fresh grape juice of the very best quality. He would never place such a temptation before the people. He was trying to save from those very destructive habits they had fallen into. As children, we were always told that Jesus changed water into alcohol, and therefore it was good for private use as well as for use as a symbol of his blood during communion. How could something that degrades and destroys life be connected to something so sacred as God's Son being offered to save lives? You only have to live in a country like South Africa to understand how many people's lives have been destroyed because of alcoholism after the system of payment with wine on the wine farms was introduced. Even among the academics, heavy drinking was nothing unusual, and over the years, I had become more and more concerned about the effect of alcohol on Walter's already damaged liver. After we stopped drinking, we saved almost a quarter of our salary, which we used to spend on beer, wine, and spirits, and on medication to pep up the liver and help with the inevitable hangovers. The more I learned about this God of the Bible, the more grateful I became that he had sought us and brought to us these wonderful life-saving principles. I felt for the first time that God had taken a personal interest in me, my fears, my happiness, and my needs. When I was very small, my grandmother sometimes took care of me And to keep me busy, she would give me a magnet to find pins and other metal objects that had slipped in between the wooden floorboards or into the cracks in the wood. She probably tossed the pins there deliberately, but there was nothing I enjoyed more, because beside the pins, I sometimes drew out what I called my secret treasure. Occasionally, my granny, by accident, dropped some piece of jewelry or pretty metal buttons and other tiny objects, which I kept in a little treasure box. It was my own treasure which I discovered and brought to the surface all by myself, and it was more valuable to me than all the money in the world. Just like my childhood treasure box with its valuable bits and pieces, my new treasure box was being filled daily with new valuable gems of light from the Bible, gems of understanding, acceptance, and grace from the God I had always secretly been hoping to find. It was a warm spring day, and bees were droning busily in the jasmine bush outside the dining room window. While we were still seated around the table after lunch, we started discussing a text we found in Malachi 3, verses 8 through 11, where God challenges us to give him 1/10 of our income, a tithe for the furtherance of his work, promising such blessing that there will not be room enough to receive it. For Walter, this was a bitter pill to swallow. He felt he wanted to decide for himself what to do with his hard-earned money, and who knows what the church will do with it. But being the kind of person he was, he liked a challenge and decided to pay his first tithe. He began working out a figure, but came up with 2 different possibilities, one on his salary after deductions and the other on the full salary. Quite frustrated, he said, "Lord, if I really have to pay this tithe, as you say in the Bible, then you will once again have to show me how much." A few minutes later, we heard footsteps at the front door as the postman approached and slipped the post through the slit in the door. We opened the letter and found a small repayment check from a lawyer from Walter's father's deceased estate. For a moment, we stood motionless as we struggled to believe the figure written on the check. It was the exact amount of one of the figures for the tithe Walter had just worked out. This was the sign that Walter had asked for, but it was the higher amount. Well, we thought, if God paid his own first tithe, he will certainly find ways to help us to pay the next one and the next. The following Sabbath, we went to church again. We met at Werner and Inga's home, and Walter offered to stay with the little children at their home so that the mothers could go to the service. During this time, he decided to read the book of Job. But as he was reading, he became more and more agitated. His scientific mind struggled to grasp how the sores on Job could just appear from nowhere. Every sane person knows that sores will appear after some kind of infection or disease, but not just out of the blue, he thought to himself. A creeping feeling of unbelief started to take hold of him, and he wondered if we had been deceived. Maybe all the things that led us to this faith were purely coincidental. Maybe there was no God at all, and the Bible was just a book of myths. As he was ready to close the Bible, he started noticing a dull ache on the side of his leg. At first he tried to ignore it, but it got increasingly hotter and more painful. In the bathroom, he noticed that an unusual sore was developing on his upper leg. It was like nothing he had ever seen before. A hot, painful, round, red, bumpy area from which a clear, watery fluid was oozing down his leg. The skin was not broken. It wasn't an open sore, and yet fluid was flowing through the skin, almost like perspiration. Okay, God, I believe you. I believe Job's sores did appear from nowhere, Walter mumbled to himself as he continued to read the book of Job. Soon, he noticed that the pain had subsided, and there was hardly any evidence of any sore on his leg. After lunch with our new friends, we drove home discussing the strange event of the morning. Walter was in a pensive, irritable mood. "You know," he said after a while, "it must have all been coincidence. Possibly just an insect bite or something. It's utter nonsense. I really don't believe that Satan could literally touch Job and he would break out in boils. How could I be so gullible to take everything literally in the Bible?" he said with more than a hint of defiance. As we were speaking, I noticed him rubbing his leg from time to time. And by the time we arrived home, the sore on his Job's leg had returned with more vengeance than before. This time, it persisted for a week. But during that time, the unbelieving Thomas resolved to lay down his so-called advanced scientific perceptions based on the evidence of things seen, and ventured on a new journey of faith, the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Hebrews 11:1. As we continued to study our Bibles, we came to the realization that we had to be baptized as a confession of our newfound faith. We felt a little embarrassed and uneasy with the concept, but determined to walk in the footsteps of the one who endured much more suffering, ridicule, and persecution in order to save mankind from the utterly degraded state it had sunk into. Because man, by choosing to obey the enemy of God, gave dominion of this earth to Satan. The beautiful creation of love and freedom was enslaved to sin and bondage, and only the Son of God, the one who created man, could redeem him from the mistake of the past and the sad consequences of the present and the future. Little did we know that the servant is not greater than the master, for soon we experienced fierce opposition and ridicule from our friends and family, and to our surprise, more so from those who claimed to be Christians. Before we embarked on our strange but exhilarating journey of the Scriptures, Walter's family from Cape Town used to visit us every weekend. We would drink beer together and grill pork sausages and play skat, a German card game designed for only the intellectual elite, till late in the night. Walter, in his by then inebriated state, was always the center of the party with his gift of telling jokes and impersonating people. After we decided to quit drinking and eating meat that was unfit for our health, as described in the Bible, we tried to explain to them that we would like to continue meeting with them, but if they don't mind, we would no longer drink or eat the pork. The reaction of his family was astounding and even painful to us. Walter's cousin, who was Walter's best childhood friend, broke all ties with us from that moment onward, and refused to ever put his foot in our house again. A promise he kept faithfully up until this very day. The family expressed their concern that something really sinister had happened to Walter, or that his much learning doth make thee mad, as Festus said to Paul, and that he needed a well-deserved long holiday, as someone whispered to me. But when they were not able to sway us from our conviction, their ridicule turned into open opposition and contempt. Walter's cousin and his Catholic wife were the godparents to two of our children, and they decided to take us to court and have us proclaimed unfit parents who deprived their children by changing their religion. The lawyer evidently could not file such a case, and our children were not removed from us and placed into the custody of the godparents as they had hoped. But their bitterness and rejection remain till this day, even after several attempts from our side to repair the friendship. Amidst all the opposition, we decided to continue with our decision to be baptized, which caused some commotion in the church. The pastor of the college church refused to baptize us for whatever reason. My guess is that he didn't care to be involved with such an opinionated academic and his family with their dubious spiritualistic history, a realm which most clergymen refuse to either acknowledge or deal with. The youth pastor was, however, willing to visit us and work through some of the general vows to prepare us for baptism. That blessed morning in April 1987 arrived, and we set off to church early on that beautiful Sabbath morning in our best clothing. I had specially made a skirt for the occasion, and for many months it was the only one I possessed. The tranquil church, with its high stained glassed windows and cascading gardens, was set against the foot of the Helderberg mountain, in those years still covered in dark green forests with exquisite views of the ocean from a little higher up. A soft, serene hue from the yellow stained glass spilled over the comfortable pews inside the church. Hundreds of inquisitive faces watched as we were summoned to the front of the church. With us was another German lady, Tessie, who was also to be baptized. Little did we know that this would not be the last time our paths would cross. As we came up out of the water in the baptismal font, the Helderberg choir was singing a beautiful hymn. It sounded like the angel choirs were singing and praising God for the miracle that was taking place. I couldn't hold back the tears of joy, and like Peter, James, and John on the Mount of Transfiguration, I wanted to say, Lord, it is good for us to be here. If thou wilt, let us make here 3 tabernacles. But we had to go back down into the valley, where, as we soon found out, we would have to contend with the demon possessed of this daily spiritual struggle. Oh, if only we had the faith of a mustard seed, we would have been able to move the mountain that was lying ahead of us. The following week, we started to seriously consider our future. In 3 months' time, we would no more have salary checks, no savings in the bank, with debt on our house and car, 3 little children, 2 of them attending an elite school at an elite tariff, and a dog and 2 cats to care for. As we discussed our dilemma with Werner, the idea crystallized in both the men's minds that we could go farming together. Werner wanted to opt out of his cabinet-making business and move away from the city. We would sell our house, and he his house and business, and invest in a dairy farm together. That would provide some income for the two families. Tessie, who was baptized with us, was good friends with Werner and Inge, and she and her retired husband Heinrich decided to join us as a third party in the farming venture, even though her husband did not accept the Bible truth. We searched for a farm and soon went out to view a farm in the Montague district, some 2 hours' drive from Cape Town. What do you think? Is this the right farm? It does have 2 houses and enough to get started. It has apricots and grapes and boreholes and a fountain. Heinrich will set up the dairy and we can buy more cows. Walter rambled on as he was thinking out loud. We must pray and ask God if this is the right place. Or rather, Werner, you pray and ask God. You have better connections with him. He knows you better. We're very new at this prayer thing, Walter continued. Within 24 hours, Werner had the answer from God. Yes, this is the farm. We immediately put our house on the market, and within a week, our lovely home was sold to a well-known Western Province rugby fly half. We now had just enough money to secure our third of the investment, but Werner was still tied up in his business, and being a foreigner, the bank would not give him a loan for his share of the farm. In order not to lose the purchase deal, Walter agreed to take the loan on his name until Werner's business and house had sold. When the time came for us to take possession of the farm, our children still had to remain at their school, and Walter had to round up his work at the university till the end of the term. Someone had to be at the farm, so the lot fell on me to go ahead with 3-year-old Robert to keep things ticking over. Just prior to our selling the house, Walter was driving out of town with Robert sitting in the back seat. In those days, seat belts hardly existed in South Africa, and children were not buckled into kiddies' seats. This, strangely enough, saved Robert's life. Just before Walter indicated to turn up a farm road off the freeway, Robert toppled over and fell asleep in the back seat. Seconds later, a car came speeding from behind and struck my little yellow Volkswagen Beetle from behind as Walter was turning. The impact caused the rear window to take off like a frisbee and land some 100 meters from the car. If Robert had been sitting upright, his head would surely have been crushed. We thanked God for his protection, and although my car was written off, we at least had Walter's car. For a while, that is. On the farm, I faced the daunting task of milking a small herd of cows one by one in a dilapidated shed with antiquated equipment and no farm laborers to help. We planned to put up a new dairy, and the cheese factory that collects the milk suggested we ask the neighboring dairy farmer if we could deliver our milk to him until our tank arrived. My only transport was an open Jeep, and many cold, rainy winter mornings I would struggle alone to load the heavy milk canisters and deliver the milk to the neighbor. I didn't dare to leave little Robert alone in the house, and was obliged to wake him at 4 o'clock in the morning from his warm bed and take him with me into the cold and dark. When the day was over, and my body was aching all over from handling obstinate cows and doing other farm duties, discouragement would take hold of me. I was so far from my family and there were no phones. I felt totally abandoned and worn out. Then one night in my bed, I called to God. I'm so tired. I'm so very tired. Is there no one who can help me? I asked in despair and cried myself to sleep. The next morning, as I was rounding up the cows to be milked, I saw two figures walking through the mist up the dirt road. The two colored men greeted me friendly and asked if there was work for them on the farm. The one man, called Aaron, had been working on a dairy farm in the Free State, as it was called then. I closed my eyes for a moment and thanked God for hearing my prayer. From that day on, Aaron and his friend faithfully milked the cows and helped with other duties on the farm. Then came the next trial. One day, as Walter was traveling between Somerset West and the farm, he was driving through a town. Suddenly, a car came rushing through the stop street and smashed into our only remaining car. The driver of the other car, a headmaster at the local school, was shocked and flustered. He always stops at that stop street, he exclaimed, but he didn't know what had happened that day. Now, we were totally without a vehicle and were obligated to rent a cheap little car. But it wasn't long before the rented car had battery trouble and we had to return it to the rental company to exchange the battery. I went with Walter back to Somerset West with many doubts and fears racing through my mind. The rapid changes and hardships had also been very difficult for our children. As if it weren't enough that they gave up sport activities and friends because of their willingness to keep the Sabbath together with us, they now had to go to a country school with uncouth children from a rough farming community. When we arrived at the rental company, I was pensively strolling around the car when a man suddenly said to me in Afrikaans, my mother tongue, "Good morning. I see your husband has a very powerful weapon in the car." I looked at the colored man with his round, friendly face in his blue worker's overall, wondering if we were in trouble for something. "No," I said defensively. "My husband doesn't carry a gun." "I don't mean that kind of weapon. Come, let me show you." At the car window, he pointed to Walter's Bible on the console. "Oh, that weapon." I merely laughed, too shy to say anything further. But the man continued, "Tell me, where do you worship?" His question caught me off guard. Up there in Somerset West." I was still too embarrassed to say that I belonged to that strange group that seemed to believe everything contrary to the rest of the world. "I mean, what church is that?" Once again, I had the opportunity to squirm my way out of it. "Well, it's Helderberg. It's Helderberg College Church, up there against the mountain." "No, I mean, what denomination do you belong to?" I didn't wait for the cock to crow the third time and answered shyly, "The Seventh-day Adventist Church." Instead of expected ridicule, the man smiled his healthy smile, pointing his index finger upward to the sky, and said, "And they have the truth after all." He turned and walked towards the front of the car, where he seemed to help sort out the problem with the battery. Soon the new battery was installed and we drove off. I told Walter about the interesting conversation I had with the colored worker who helped to install the battery. But there was no colored worker. The only one who helped me with the battery was the owner himself, Walter argued. "No, There was another man, the one in the blue overall. I insisted and repeated my story, getting quite agitated that he wouldn't believe me. I didn't see anyone else. But if there was someone who said those things to you, he must have been an Adventist himself. Let's go back and ask him. With that, Walter turned the car around and headed back for the rental company. We asked around and searched, but there was no one of that description. In stunned silence, we drove on, wondering how it was possible that he disappeared into thin air, how it was that only I saw him, and how he knew that the Bible in our car belonged to my husband and not to me. But most of all, how did a total stranger know that I had serious doubts in my mind about whether we had indeed made the right decisions? Slowly, it dawned on me that God had taken a personal interest in me, my trials and doubts and fears, and had stretched out his hand to strengthen and comfort me. That was the last time I ever doubted that this peculiar church, with its peculiar people, was the bearer of eternal and present truth, the John the Baptist who was to prepare the way for the second coming of the true Messiah. And what an awesome thought that I had a special role to play in all of this. Psalm 91 verse 11, for he shall give his angel charge over thee, to keep thee in all thy ways. The time came when all three families moved to the farm. The children looked forward to romping in the haystack and searching for wild animals and strange and wonderful insects. We had almost unpacked all of our boxes when we came across a couple of heavy ones filled with bottles full of alcohol. When we had packed all our belongings from our house in Stellenbosch, we were uncertain as to what to do with our large collection of expensive red and white wines and spirits. We had stopped drinking alcohol entirely and felt it wasn't right to give it to our friends, for it is written in Habakkuk 2 verse 15, woe unto him that giveth his neighbor drink, that putteth thy bottles to him, and maketh him drunken also, that thou mayest look on their nakedness. But it had cost us a fortune to build up such a sought-after collection of wines, some of them being private bin wines that sold for a couple of $1,000 a bottle at wine auctions, which was more than a month's salary in those days. So we decided to take the wines with us to the farm until we knew what to do with them. Then we had an idea. We carried the heavy boxes to the bathroom and started pouring the expensive liquid down the toilet. It took us a whole morning to empty the bottles and wash them for future use when we had planned to bottle some grape juice from our vineyards. What we didn't know, however, was that the septic tank was maintained by a fine balance of bacteria. Too late, we realized the next morning that the inebriated bacteria ceased to do their job, and we had to call for the municipality to empty the tank. The man who operated the machines gave a few curious sniffs and said, strange, I've never in my entire life smelt such a fruity septic tank. Wonder what happened here. We knew what had happened, but Walter and I merely looked at each other and chuckled to ourselves without saying a word. The men started plowing and sowing wheat. More cows were bought, and soon the new dairy had been completed. We were now able to store our milk in our own tank and decided to pay the neighbor a visit to claim our share of the income for the milk we had delivered to him. When Walter produced the record we kept of the amount delivered, the farmer looked calmly at him and asked him, "What milk was this?" "What do you mean, what milk was this?" "The milk my wife delivered faithfully to you for 3 months. You still wrote down the liters on the card in your dairy." "I'm sorry, but you know it's illegal to deliver milk to another dairy? I would never do anything illegal," the farmer said with a condescending smile, and continued shouting orders to his workers. "Illegal? But the cheese factory told me to bring it to you till my tank was installed," Walter exclaimed with a puzzled look. The man started walking off, calling over his shoulder, "Go ask them yourself." We couldn't believe the trap we had fallen into. All those months, and no fruits for our back-breaking labor. Thousands of rands had gone into the pockets of a crook. And to ruin relationships even more, the farmer tried to sell us cows that belonged to another farmer at almost double the price that the owner himself was asking. Fortunately, Walter managed to hear about the scam and went straight to the owner and bought the cows at the original price. In spite of our nasty experience, Walter was still willing to help. And when he heard that our neighbor was having difficulty inseminating his cows, he offered to go and teach him the techniques he had learned at the university. When he arrived at the neighboring farm, the man was, with his arm up to the shoulder, stuck into the backside of a cow, swearing and blaspheming God for his unsuccessful attempts. As Walter patiently showed the rude, ungrateful man how to do it, he was wondering how long God would allow this man to continue in such a way. A few days later, a mighty storm came up. Branches were filing past our windows as the huge gum trees were bent low before the destructive wind. The damage on our farm was fortunately minimal. Only a few corrugated roof plates were torn from the calf stalls. But for our unpleasant neighbor, disaster had struck. The whole roof of his huge shed had been lifted in the wind, transported across the road to the opposite field, and dumped onto his best stud cows, killing some of them instantly. And as if that wasn't enough, a few months later, the poor man was pulling up his pump from his borehole when the chain attached to the pump shot loose from the tractor and wrapped itself around his leg, dragging him at great speed over the earth and dashed him against the borehole structure. His neck was fractured, which left him permanently paralyzed from the neck down. The sad ending to the story was that he had to give up farming and left, leaving his farm totally abandoned, with only the sound of the rolling small karoo bushes scurrying over the sand and the lonely banging of an insect screen in the wind. On our own farm, we were struggling to make ends meet. Our income from the dairy was merely covering costs. The money we had kept aside for our family to survive for the first year was fast running out. We were also carrying the interest on the loan from the bank that we had taken out to secure Werner's third part in the farm. At that point, Inge no longer wanted to live in such a remote part of the country, and suddenly all our plans seemed to be falling apart. Then one day, Werner announced that they decided to move to Australia, and within a short while, they were gone, and we were on our own. During this time, more and more devastating incidents were slowly eating away at our faith in the fact that God had led us to this farm. The wheat we had sowed was standing higher, and the grains were fuller than on any other farm in the neighborhood. When farmers asked us what secret method we used, Walter presumptuously said, "We simply sowed, and God rewarded us because we are doing His will. We are keeping His commandments." How little did we know about the fine line between presumption and faith. But then, just before harvest time, a great swarm of yellow finches settled on the farm and proceeded to devour our best field, the one that everyone was admiring. In vain, we tried every method in the book to scare them away, but in no time, a number of our best fields were destroyed. In utter dismay, we looked at the empty stalks swaying in the afternoon breeze as the guinea fowls pecked up the few stray kernels that were left behind. "How can this be?" Walter gasped. "How can God allow this? I thought He promised in the Bible that He would protect us." But the onslaught wasn't over yet. When the remaining wheat was ready to be harvested, we rented a huge harvesting machine from a farmer in the district, hoping we would at least get something for all our work. They worked the field furthest away first, which was situated all along the boundary of our neighbor on the other side of our farm. After the day's work, the harvest was left on the field for the night. But when the workers returned the next morning, they discovered that someone had climbed over the fence and poured sugar into the fuel tank of the harvester. This meant that the engine had to be taken apart and cleaned out, which cost us a great deal of time, money, and nerves. The following weeks, we had to contend with a different challenge. Almost every Sabbath, there seemed to be something wrong with the water. More than once, the fountain up in the mountain suddenly stopped running on a Friday evening or on a Sabbath morning. After inspection, Walter found that someone was deliberately blocking the inlet of the pipe to our houses. More than once, the pipes were even slashed, with water gushing out at several places along the kilometer-long pipe. Instead of relaxing with his family on the Sabbath, reading and singing songs or telling stories to the children, Walter often had to struggle to fix the problem, returning to the house sweaty and stressed and in a bad mood. To make things worse, some church members were spreading the story that our farm was haunted because of our occult background, and that was the reason for Werner and his family leaving. We hadn't spoken to anyone, least of all the church members, about the things that had happened on the farm, and were disappointed when the church was buzzing with speculations. Those who had once promised their support for our project were now slowly dwindling. We found ourselves all alone, wrestling with God day and night, trying to understand why He was allowing these things to happen. Our children were being bullied and ridiculed at school. The neighboring farmers tried to ruin us, and those in the church we had looked up to were critical and unsupportive. Many days I would despair and cry to God till I slumped into a lifeless heap on the ground. I had no strength to continue any further. One night, I had a very disturbing dream. I woke up in a sweat, knowing immediately that this wasn't just another dream born from some fear of an overworked mind. I dreamt I was walking in a beautiful orchard of trees that looked like orange trees. Some of the trees had lovely flowers, and as I reached to pick one of the flowers, a huge horned adder slithered from under the lush green foliage and bit me in the hand. In terror, I called to Walter, who was a little while off, and he rushed towards me, brushing the snake aside, saying with a calm voice, "Don't worry, the snake can do you no harm." And with that, the adder was suddenly transformed into a puny little snake, and it slid back into the tree. I then began to look with new interest at the trees that were in neat rows, some with fruit on, and others with flowers, and what seemed like healthy green leaves. But as I looked more closely, I discovered that the trees with flowers were actually dead trees covered in a vine with beautiful flowers. Some trees were real and healthy with real fruit, but to my surprise, most were dead trees, overgrown with vines, under which, unbeknownst to passers-by, was hiding a dangerous viper. At first, we couldn't see any significance of the dream in our lives, but soon, after many disappointments, we were able to understand. As we continued to study the Bible, we understood that trees were often used as symbols for people in the biblical context. The orchard was the church, and the trees were the people. Some people were good trees with good fruit, but other members of the church were dead inside and merely looked good from the outside. They seemed to attract with their false beauty, but it was not Christ that dwelled under that facade, but Satan himself. And although it seemed that Satan had dealt us a deadly blow, we had nothing to fear. My dreams served well to prepare us in our Christian walk as we continued to be disappointed by people we trusted, and it gave us the assurance that come what may, God will not leave us. Psalms 23 and verse 4. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. But there was still much more to come. The farm saga seemed to have shifted gears. One day, I got an earache, and before I reached the doctor, my eardrum had burst. After surgery, I had to stay in bed for a few days. And during this time, I was trying to read my Bible as much as possible. When Heinrich and Tessie, who were living in the village 10 kilometers away, came to visit me, Heinrich saw the Bible lying on the bed and suddenly complained bitterly about the fact that I was reading the Bible only. Having been an atheist his whole life, the old German was reluctant to accept Christianity and to give up his old habits. But he accepted the Sabbath half-heartedly for his wife's sake. Reading through the first part of Genesis while recovering in the bed, I happened to notice that the diet of man, according to Genesis 2 and 3, was originally only fruit from trees and seeds, and after the fall of man, also plants of the field were added. In Genesis 9 and verse 3, when Noah and his family emerged from the ark onto barren, uncultivated land, God describes a further change of events and allows man to use clean animals for food. With a smile and a significant degree of embarrassment, I remembered Walter as he shoved a frying pan with beefsteak under the nose of some of our vegetarian friends, saying in his usual provoking way, This is real food, not that artificial rubbish you're eating. A couple of weekends later, we had some friends from Somerset West for a visit till late that evening. The next morning, as we sat at the breakfast table, my eyes fell upon the chicken bones around the previous night's barbecue fire, on which big green flies, like vultures, were noisily feasting. Our pet chickens were chatting and pecking as they strolled lazily across the lawn, now and then stretching a thin yellow leg like an ungraceful ballerina in the warm, sunny morning. I was suddenly repulsed by the entire scene and felt uncomfortable with the idea of the drumstick of our faithful mother hen on my plate. I even got second thoughts about eating the eggs as I watched the chickens peck up the fresh doggy poo on the lawn like tasty morsels. I looked down at my breakfast plate for a few moments in silence and then said tentatively, I wonder if we shouldn't stop eating meat. It just doesn't seem right. Before I could explain myself, Walter interrupted. That's strange. I've just been thinking the very same thing. And without any further discussion on the subject, we started putting our resolution into practice. After Werner had left for Australia, Heinrich started getting more and more involved with the farming activities and usually arrived on the farm around our usual breakfast time, just after Walter had finished at the dairy. Occasionally, he would sit down to have breakfast with us. But this particular morning, he grunted disapprovingly of our simple meal of cereal and toast with avocado and fruit. He started to accuse us of being ridiculous and fanatical for not having the traditional German breakfast of sausages, cold meats, and eggs. As he spoke, he became so irate that he literally brushed some of the items off the table and walked out, never to join us for breakfast again. We were flabbergasted and hurt at such a reaction on a simple change we had made in our lifestyle, which, according to modern science, was much healthier anyway. But at the same time, his attitude made us realize that this must be an important spiritual issue as well. During this time, a coal porter, our friend Jane's brother, would occasionally stop by on his way from Port Elizabeth to Cape Town. He was a balm sent from heaven for our wounds. After some discussions till late at night, he left us with enough reading material until he returned on his next journey. At first, we didn't seem to find much time to read. But one day, Walter received a strange phone call out of the blue from an ex-colleague at the zoology department who accused him of being involved with a weird sect. While Walter was trying to explain that they're not weird, but only believe what is written in the Bible, this man interrupted him rudely and shouted, "You also believe in that kleptomaniac witch, Ellen White." Kleptomaniac witch? Walter thought. What on earth is this man talking about? We had vaguely heard about this woman writer from the previous century, but had never read anything she wrote. Her writings were often also referred to as the spirit of prophecy, the gift which was given to Israel through the ages, as well as to the church of the time of the end, according to the book of Revelation. Revelation 12:17. And the dragon was wroth with the woman, and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God, and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. Revelation 19:10. And I fell at his feet to worship him. And he said to me, See thou do it not, for I am thy fellow servant, and of thy brethren, which have the testimony of Jesus. Worship God, for the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. We understood from the Bible that when God's people testified of the law and the Lamb of God, only then could the gift of prophecy be given to them to prepare them for the great events which were to take place. When the law and the Sabbath were once again rediscovered and restored after the great disappointment in 1844, then was the spirit of prophecy again manifested in God's church through a frail young girl named Ellen Harmon, later by the name of Ellen G. White, after she married James White. Lamentations 2 and verse 9. Her gates are sunk into the ground. He hath destroyed and broken her bars. Her king and her princes are among the Gentiles. The law is no more. Her prophets also find no vision from the Lord. Also the Lord declares by the prophet Amos that he will do nothing, but he revealeth his secrets unto his servants the prophets. Amos 3 and verse 7. Well, we thought, if someone can have such a violent reaction and animosity against her, then it's time we investigate what it is that she wrote. We rummaged through the pile of books the Cole Porter had left us and started reading. As a mother and housewife, I was interested in the book called Counsels on Diet and Food, and was amazed to discover that her advice more than 150 years earlier was not to eat meat in this time that we are living in, simply because animals are not healthy anymore, which could cause numerous degenerative diseases of mind and body. Amazingly, God had impressed these things upon both of us even before we read it. We discovered in every book we read that her writings were in harmony with the Bible and could be trusted. The book Desire of Ages on the life of Jesus made a deep impression on us. It was clear to us that the same Spirit that inspired the authors of the Bible also inspired Ellen White, God's final messenger for his church on earth. And the same rebellious spirit that condemns the plain teachings of the Bible also condemns the writings of Ellen G. White. Her writings were also perfectly in harmony with the beliefs of the reformers of the Middle Ages, as well as some later reformers right up unto her own time. All of them, including herself, seemed to call God's people out of apostasy and pointed to present truth as was revealed to them through diligently searching the Scriptures. We were grateful that God had sent Jane's brother to brighten and broaden our horizon with the books he left us, and realized it wasn't merely coincidence that he always arrived at the right time. Relationships between Heinrich and us deteriorated even further after we started reading these books. He suddenly reverted to character assassination when we were not influenced by his incessant ranting and raving against the Bible. I seemed to be doing everything wrong in his eyes when I occasionally forgot to fetch his milk from the dairy or failed to keep some eggs aside for him. He reminded me in strong words that I should get my act together. And besides, he argued, I shouldn't be working on the farm if I were a good Christian. I would be out visiting the people in the old age homes and do some other charity work. True Christians don't study the Bible. They do good works. After harassing me for months, I began to withdraw under his constant insults, at which he declared he couldn't work with me, and then proceeded to provoke Walter. Having read Proverbs 17:28, Even a fool, when he holdeth his peace, is counted wise, and he that shutteth his lips is esteemed a man of understanding. Walter determined not to lose his composure under any circumstances. But one unfortunate morning, while he was busy in the dairy, Heinrich started arguing about issues on the farm and our apparent weaknesses and character faults. At that point, Walter lost sight of all his brave resolutions and gave Heinrich a piece of his mind. But instead of retaliating, Heinrich calmly brushed his hands together and said with a satisfied smirk, "I'm so glad you lost your temper. Now I know you're not really a Christian." And like a dog that got the bone, he strutted off to revel in his victory. Too late, we realized our mistake in doing business together with an unbeliever who was constantly criticizing God's ways and placing burdens upon his people. As we reflected over the unjust treatment we endured during the year we spent on the farm in the wilderness, we discovered that God always led his people through such a period in their lives to teach them valuable lessons in faith. Moses had to spend 40 years in the wilderness before he was ready for the work God assigned to him. The Israelites were led through the desert to teach them not to trust in their own judgment, but solely on divine revelation. Their characters were to be changed and strengthened, and like Job, they had to reach the point where they could say, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust him." Job 13, verse 15. But sadly, apart from only a few, they never learned the lessons and never saw the promised land. One night, discouraged almost to the point of utter despair, we gathered to pray to God. "We cannot continue this way any longer," Walter said tiredly. "We have been here almost a year and had nothing but trouble. We have no more money, and our interest rates are soaring." He looked at my drawn, tear-stained face and asked, "Didn't we leave our old ways for the Bible truth?" I nodded as he continued, "Are we not trying to keep God's commandments to the best of our knowledge and ability?" Again I nodded. "And are the promises in the Bible not also for us?" "Yes," I sobbed. "Then let us write a letter to God and ask him to fulfill his promises for us and deliver us from the situation that we're in." With new courage, we proceeded to sit down and write our first letter to God. We explained to God our pain and disappointment, our financial situation, our concerns for our children, regret about coming to the farm in the first place, and placing our trust in mere man, and our despair about the future. We wrote down God's promises and his assurances that he would deliver and protect those that do his will and fulfill all their needs, and then claim them. Then we both signed the document and placed it on the floor in front of us and knelt down to pray, asking God to hear our prayer and to see our tears of desperation. But God knew all these things already. He knows the end from the beginning. Our inspired pioneer wrote, "The Lord doth not afflict willingly, nor grieve the children of men." Lamentations 3:33. "Like as a father pitieth his children, so the Lord pitieth them that fear him. For he knoweth our frame. He remembereth that we are dust." Psalm 103, verses 13 and 14. He knows our heart, for he reads every secret of the soul. He knows the end from the beginning. Counsels on Health, page 375, paragraph 2. The very next morning, Walter got a telephone call from a professor at another large university in the Cape, asking him if he would be willing to help out with a temporary post. Without even hesitating, Walter eagerly accepted and asked when he could start. "Oh, that would be another few months before we get it approved by the rector and through all the committees, but we'll let you know," the professor said, and then hung up. That's no good, Walter thought disappointedly. In a few months, we'll probably be starved to death. Did God not understand our predicament? We continued our work on the farm in a depressed state, when by late afternoon, Walter received another call from the same professor. "A very unusual thing happened this morning," the man said, a little baffled. "As I was walking to the rector's office to hand in the application for your appointment, I bumped into the rector himself. He was just on his way to the airport for some conference, which meant that our application would have to wait till after his return in a few weeks. But then the rector asked, 'What is this all about?' And when I explained to him, he said, 'Just give it to me. I'll just sign it.' So, Dr. Veith, it seems to me you'll be starting your first lectures by next week." Next week? Who's going to milk the cows in the meantime and take care of the farm? And how are we going to find a house to rent at such short notice and move all our belongings within less than a week? And what about schools for the children? In those days, homeschooling was still illegal in our country, which would have been a good option. Our minds were racing with 100 ways to solve our problem, when once again, God had already solved it for us. The next morning, there was a knock at the door. A forlorn young couple stood at the door. They had been working on a farm in Zimbabwe, but they were forced to leave because they wished to keep the Sabbath, and their manager refused to give them the day off. They didn't feel comfortable living in the city and only wanted a place to stay on a farm for a while, and were just too grateful for the added bonus of the small income they would have from the dairy. Once again, we were amazed at the providence and workings of God, who takes care of all the needs of his children. In no time, friends found us a house to rent in Somerset West, and the day after our arrival, we set out to enroll our children at Helderberg College, the Adventist school. Our only problem was that we had no more than a few rand to our name to buy school clothes and food for us until Walter received his first salary. Fortunately, there was a cupboard at the school with some second-hand clothing, and payment was due only at the end of the month. With our last money, we stopped at the cheapest clothing store to buy our daughter some school socks. And when we returned to the car, Tanya saw a small brown envelope lying on the floor in the back of the car. When we opened it, there was 150 rand, just enough to buy some food and a few other necessities for a week. We hadn't told anyone about our plight, because for Walter, it was the greatest insult and embarrassment to admit that he was struggling. As he always stated, he would rather cook and eat his shoes than to ask for anything or to receive alms from anyone. But God knew his pride and slowly started training him to give up his self-dependence and those circumstances that he was able to control. A week later, we received another anonymous envelope and another anonymous 150 rand, just enough to see us through until Walter received his first salary check. But we have this treasure in earthen vessels, that the excellency of the power may be of God and not of us. 2 Corinthians 4 and verse 7. After we had unpacked our boxes and moved our furniture in place, we sat down on the bed and sighed a sigh of exhaustion, but also of relief. We were grateful that we were temporarily relieved of the burden of the farm, but apprehensively wondered what challenges were awaiting us on the new road that lay ahead. The end of chapter 6 of Dwelling in the Secret Place by Sonica Veith.